Hi everyone, and welcome to this year's spring wreath making tutorial. I'm so excited to have you here, whether you're watching for just the enjoyment of watching make this wreath and take some inspiration away, or whether you're making your kit with me this year. We've got really beautiful selection of spring foliage and flowers and bulbs, and of course there's eggs and feathers because yeah, it's just it's actually such a beautiful day today. The sun is shining, it's like the perfect spring day, and yeah, I feel extremely grateful to be able to have all these flowers surrounding me right now. And yeah, I hope that the sun is shining where you are too, and that you just really enjoy the next kind of 45 minutes to an hour. But you know, I'm going to make this in real time with you today, and there is absolutely no rush. Like, feel free to pause the video, to walk away from your wreath, come back at it, you know, take your time. This is what wreath making is all about. It's meant to be an absolute pleasure and a real time to kind of escape everything. So yeah, if you've made a wreath with me before, then we'll go through all this kind of similar steps. Or if you've never made a wreath as well, like, this is absolutely perfect for you too. So yeah, there is, you don't need any like previous floristry skills to be watching this today. And it's all sustainable, this wreath. So we're using a moss-based wreath, which you've all got a bag of moss to use. So we're going to start by making that mechanic. And it's really simple. You've all got a reel of wire. So just find the end of that. And then on our wire wreath base, we're just going to simply tie it, loop it around like that. This bit doesn't need to be particularly neat because you're not going to see it at the end. And then we just need to create a bit of a base for the moss to sit on, because we don't want it to fall right through. So it's just a very simple zigzag around your wreath. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that whenever you're kind of tying anything onto your wreath, you do need to keep it quite nice and taut. You don't want it too tight, because your wreath wire will actually kind of start to warp and won't be as flat. But equally, you don't want it loose, because things are going to fall off and your moss won't be as compact as it needs to be. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Go all the way around back to the beginning, and you leave your wire attached. And then just take your moss out of its bag. And if it's a little bit dry, just give it a nice little mist. You could actually put it in a bucket of water and completely submerge it. You can see mine's quite wet here, and that's absolutely perfect. And this is instead of using something like floral foam. So it keeps everything nice and hydrated, and you can kind of keep topping it up. You can keep misting it. Keeps all of our foliage lovely and fresh. So you just want to kind of, this is the messy part of making a wreath, and I actually love it. I think there's actually science behind getting your hands dirty and in kind of soil and moss and stuff. That releases like real feel-good toxins in our body. I don't know if they're called toxins, but yeah, I'm not a scientist. But yeah, it's a real messy one, but I encourage you to really get involved. And if you're doing it with your kids, let them get their hands messy at this point. So we're just gonna, I'm gonna roll my sleeves up. We are just gonna be kind of taking clumps of this, and you can kind of, you'll see the bits of twigs, and there will be, you know, bits and bobs in there that you may not want. Don't worry too much. And we're just gonna kind of give it a little bit of a squeeze and place it onto the frame. Just place it on top, and then take your wire over and under again, kind of in that zigzag pattern. And you don't need it to be really thick. You've got plenty of moss here, but you don't want it too thin either. You want it to be even all the way around. So just placing that on top there and taking it around. The first bit of making this wreath is the messy part. You could do it outside if it's a lovely day, actually. I know lots of people did that last year, which looked really nice. You can get a few creepy crawlies in here. Don't panic, it is all natural stuff. Just pop them outside. I actually really like a mossed wreath on its own. I think it looks really effective, kind of rustic. So just keep going all the way around, taking your wire in that nice zigzag pattern, and you'll notice I'm kind of tugging it a little bit with every single one that I'm going around at. Just give it, you'll feel it kind of pull on your moss. You really want this bit to be nice and secure as this forms the entire base of your wreath. And it's handy as well. I often talk about your workspace when you're making a wreath to make it high up a little bit. So I normally make things on our kitchen island, just because it's a nice height and it's easy on the back. And it's handy to have a bin nearby, or a bin bag, or just, your garden waste, something, so that you can collect everything and keep your workspace nice and clean. I think it helps you see your wreath better. And if you've got any kind of big clumps in your moss, just break them up a little bit, just kind of pull it apart. Because when you're kind of starting to insert things into it, you don't want it to be too compact that you may even break one of your branches or twigs. Nice tugs every time. Right back to the beginning. And if you get back to the beginning and you think you probably haven't got enough, or you want to just keep adding more, just go round again, just add the moss on top and go round. So yeah, I think that's okay for me, covered in moss, that's fine. And I'm actually gonna leave a little bit to one side because I might use some extra to cover our vials, but it's not essential. I'm just going to leave a little bit there until I've fully finished the mechanics part. And I highly recommend keeping any leftover moss. Just pop it in a big bucket somewhere outside and use it to top on top of planters, any bulbs. I don't know about you, but our garden is suddenly bursting into kind of that fresh, zingy, lovely green stage. We've got tulips coming up. I actually planted mine really late this year. We've got narcissi, and I've even planted some iris this year for the first time. So yeah, it should be. I get very excited at this time of year. So just clearing away a little bit of that moss so that we've got a nice clean background. Now the next thing we're going to do is add our bulbs. So we're adding mascari bulbs to this wreath. You can add any bulbs. And the way that we're going to do this is the second messy job of this bit, but I promise you they are so worth it. So just removing any packaging. And we're simply going to be, when you first receive these, you want to give them a good water and then just leave them somewhere for a day or two. And if you're really keen to make your wreath, don't worry, just give them water and crack on. But yeah, you just want to make sure they're nice and moist. And just remove their pot. And they've got a lovely root system. And this is the messy part because we need to get rid of all the soil. So that at this point, the soil isn't really adding any nutrient to the bulb, so it doesn't need it. You just want its roots. So you're just going to break the bulb one by one away. You hear that lovely crackle? I'm going to do it a little bit lower, apologies, so it falls into my bin. And you're left with this. And then you're just going to tap on the edge of your bin all of that soil away as much as you can. You can kind of give it a little helping hand to get some of it away. Again, a real feel-good one that you could do outside. And I like to leave the roots really nice and long and kind of gnarly. And you're left with something like that. Now we're just going to leave them there. And I am going to come back to it. And you're going to break each one away. Being gentle, but also don't worry too much. At this stage, a bit like hyacinths, the roots, we're not too precious about them. It's got some lovely long ones on. if your bulbs have arrived and they're not in flower yet, that's also fine. They will soon flower. Now, to get the rest of the compost away from the roots, we're simply going to give them a little wash. And don't worry if you can't get it all off, you sometimes can't, it just gets so intertwined. But about that is perfect. I'm just going to lay them back down where they were. It's quite a satisfying job to do, and at this point you're giving them a really nice soak as well, so they're nice and hydrated going onto the wreath. And the moss also helps to keep the roots hydrated. But you can, every few days if you wanted to, you could go and give the roots a little spritz, particularly if they haven't flowered yet. These ones are just flowering. Actually, the heat in here today has made them little white bits pop, which is lovely. This is probably my favourite stage that they come at. They've got a little baby one coming through on all of them. So now that I've made the sink nice and dirty, we can start adding our bulbs. So the first thing I'm going to do before I do that actually is attach my twine so that we have a definitive top to our wreath. I always do this like kind of opposite myself. So just very simply take your twine over and under and just pop a nice tight knot at the top. Some of you may want to use some nice ribbon, or you may be happy with just with twine, and then just tie another little knot at the top there. Or you may have you may need a longer piece if your door's different, but I always know whereabouts ours is. So yeah, you can leave that away from you now, just so that you, particularly with this type of wreath, it's good to know what this is, because when we're attaching these, you don't want bulbs upside down. It's not going to look particularly attractive. And then we're just going to start positioning our bulbs onto the wreath in places that we think will look nice. I like to do small little clusters, and because, like I said, we've now got a top and bottom, I don't really want any going that way. You might like that look, but personally I like to keep everything kind of growing upwards. It will actually also help your flower to grow in the right direction, because sometimes they do start to bend and you'll notice they're trying to grow that way. So you're doing them a bit of a favour. This one's nice and long, so I'm going to put this one up here. And I think it's nice to have them peeping over the sides as well, so you can see some of that bulb around the edges and maybe one down there. And then once you're happy with that positioning, we're going to be wiring these onto your wreath. So we haven't cut our wire off from when we did the moss. So you just want to zigzag your wire down to a point where your first bulb is, and mine's about here. And you just want to take your wire over this point where it kind of tapers in, like so, obviously going under anything else that was surrounding it, and give it a small tug, and that's on. And then for this one, I'm going to lift those roots up because I don't want any wire on show there. It's a bit like that. And then we're going to go over that bit there. So we've just gone right on that tapered point. Lift your wreath up, take your wire over. And you don't need loads of wire on these at all. They're nice and secure as they are. And then the same for that final one. I'm just going to lift those lovely roots up so that we disguise that wire. And they're all attached. And then I'm just going to take my wire zigzagged around to the next part and start at the bottom this time, work my way up. So wire over that tapered bit, under. It's like a little bit more faffy at this point, but definitely worth doing. And that last one there. Perfect. So I'm actually still going to leave that wire attached because we have got one more thing to attach with our water vials, which are these. So these are great. So these are also a nice sustainable method that I like to use for kind of living wreaths. And we're going to top these up with water. So these are going to be our water source for our tulips and our paperwhites, which I've got below me here and that are in front there. You've got 6 stems of these. I'll just get them. And it's, again, totally up to you where you decide to position these on your wreath. And it's one of the things that I always say I absolutely love about making these kits is that it's up to you. You can copy exactly what I'm doing here if you want to, or you can have free reign and put your tulips and your paperwhites, you could cluster them all together, you could spread them all over. It doesn't matter. And I've just broken that one, but that's fine because it's about the right length. Yeah, it doesn't matter. And I just love that everybody's wreath ends up being so unique to them, regardless of the fact you all have the same kit. So similarly to what we've just done with the bulbs, you can just start to position your flowers onto your wreath, and you're going to need to cut them down anyway. So you're going to want to remove those chunkier leaves because they're not going to end up in it anyway. And I would recommend leaving them slightly longer than you think because we haven't got anything else on the wreath at this point yet. So if you have them too small, by the time you put all your foliage in, they might feel a little bit lost. Yeah, so that would be my recommendation. And I might pop this one even higher up, maybe like there. And I've got the lovely paperwhites, which are just so fragrant. I'm hoping that you can... I'm just going to position that there, and I know that it's going there. It won't stay there without being in the vial. And for this one, I might pop it in the same vial as the tulip. And then definitely one field need up here somewhere. Maybe kind of around there. You can, if you're brave enough, which I have done a few times, is just simply make a little hole. So you kind of take your scissors and you can just like work a little hole into it and simply wiggle the stem into there. They won't last as long, but if you're not too worried about that and you've got a nice big bunch of tulips at home that you can keep changing them every kind of 4 days, then that's another alternative if you don't want to faff around with vials. But we are going to faff around with vials. And the lids on these are very, very small. So you just kind of want to make that a tiny bit bigger because the tulip stems are quite chunky. So I do that by simply kind of bending them a little bit there and then just popping a slit through it. So you've just opened that up a little bit more. And then we're just going to fill that with water, not right to the top because by the time, if you watch, you get your stem in there, it's going to fill up anyway. So you don't need it too much. That's plenty enough. Pop the lid back on. You can do this with the flower in it already if you want to. I'm just going to have to remove that leaf. So it's gone all the way in there. Water level's right to the top. And then we just need to attach the vial to the wreath. And you want to, obviously at the moment you can see the vial, but don't worry about that at this stage. And I've purposely started over here because my wire's been left over here. I'm just going to take that wire over there and under. Let me just move these out of your way. And you probably want to do this in 2 places on this wreath. And again, just kind of meander through the gaps that you've got, and that's plenty. And if you do have leftover moss and you're worried that this might not get covered, this is a great point that you could start poking a bit more. You could just use the wire and you could just disguise your moss in this way. Disguise the vial, sorry. Just kind of poke it under there. You could wire this around again if you wanted to, and you could do it at the same time as kind of putting the vial on in the beginning. But yeah, that just hides that quite nicely. And then we're going to do that for all of the tulips and the paperwhites now. So again, just fill them up. About 2/3 full, I would say. Make that hole a little bit bigger. tulip can go in. Like so. And just figure out where you want that one to be. Probably going to go about there. So just again, pick your wire up, go around, and this time I will pop a little bit of that moss on first just to show you a quicker way of kind of covering that up, like so. You don't need much moss. And voila, it's completely hidden. Really, really easy. And putting the moss on at the same time as attaching it is probably the way I would suggest you doing it. I'm going to pop this one in there. And actually, you know, you could stop with just these flowers and the bulbs on the wreath. It looks so, I feel like it looks very, very spring, and it would make a very cost-effective wreath if you were looking to do something like this your own. Great, so I've got those in there. So just a bit of water. You can hear the birds all chirping outside. I'm going to see if I can wiggle this one in as well. Yeah. So I'm going to have one a little bit higher than the other, so I've got the two in there together. Just figuring out where I want these to be. Probably about there. I don't want to cover too much of these up. So a little bit of moss over and wire them in. And then last little one up here. These paperwhites just give a lovely splash of white. These ones are actually a week old, so they have come right out. And yours probably have arrived a bit more tighter closed, but you will really, really enjoy watching these open up. So I just need to take my wire up to this point. Final little bit of moss over the vial. Give it a nice tug. Last little one. And then all done. So all my vials are on, all my flowers are on, and our bulbs. Really, really pretty. And then we just need to, at this point, we've finished with our wire now, so we can tie that off. So just obviously be careful. And if you've got like a nice little gap, at this point, it makes it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to wind that round for one final time. Give it a nice tug. Make sure it's all nice and secure. Cut it off about there. And you're just going to want to take it to the back and find a bit of copper and take it under and over a couple of times. Just give that a real pull. And then once you're happy that you feel that's definitely not going anywhere, you can just simply bend it round and pop it right into your moss and it's gone, like so. And that is all of the kind of mechanics to this wreath. Spend some time on it, you know, choose where you want everything carefully. And yeah, embrace and enjoy the mess is what I'll say. And then you can have a little tidy up once you're done, which I'll do now. I think it's good as well to stand back from your wreath. I always say this, to kind of have a look from afar, make sure that you're happy with it. Oops, sorry, just missed my feet. Before we start adding everything else in. Okay, so now we're going to start adding in all of our lovely foliage. So we've got some lovely olive branches. We've got a couple of different varieties of pittosporum. And I'll do our waxflower at the end. So I like to start with I like to put the foliage on in kind of their groups of, I call them families, if you like. I like to start with the olive first. Now for this wreath, I'm actually keeping my foliage and everything quite small and a little bit more compact to make a very circular wreath. If you like to have it looking a little bit more rustic, I know last year's was a bit more rustic and kind of that kind of gnarly, natural kind of look, just keep your foliage a little bit longer and everything will feel a little bit wilder. But for this one, I decided to have them a bit shorter. So just cut down all of your foliage stems. And it's nice to have a slight variation in heights. Don't worry too much. I'll leave mine there so that you can see roughly what lengths I've been going for. And olive is typical for being, they're all funny shapes, you know, like don't worry if it actually looks like a T. Once it's on the wreath and everything, you won't notice. So again, it's a good idea to spend a little bit of time cutting all your branches first, and then you can kind of really get on rather than keep having to stop and start and cut each time. So absolutely nothing goes to waste with this. You can use everything. Yep, absolutely everything used there. And then we've got a nice little pile of our branches that we can start attaching. And the way we're going to attach them is by simply poking them into the moss. And you can try and make sure that your stems have got a nice 45-degree angle point. It does make inserting them into the moss a little bit easier. Be mindful that you've got vials, so obviously we can't poke things into the plastic, but just you can go in and around them. And when you're thinking about your wreath and the direction of the foliage, try and stay in one direction, whether it's clockwise or anti-clockwise. Mine always tend to be clockwise, so that it helps you create that very circular look, and you'll kind of see as we go around. But just start by inserting the stems. In places You don't need to be too covered. We've got lots of foliage to pop on this, and be mindful of, you know, maybe wanting to keep some of the bulbs on show, and particularly the flowers. And consider your wreath from all angles. So not just the very top bit that you might be seeing as you look directly at it, but when it's on your door, a lot of the side of your wreath becomes exposed. So just bear that in mind, and make sure that you're popping some stems in down there. Absolutely love olive. Just has that lovely green tone. You get two different colours with the leaves because the front of them gives that kind of vibrant, kind of that lovely sage green actually, whereas the back of the leaves is like a very muted, very pale green. So it just naturally adds just texture. I always feel like, even though we're filming this and doing a tutorial, this is just as much kind of my escape time as it hopefully is yours. Things are so busy here now that it's nice to stop and for me to kind of lose myself in making this. So you're inserting them enough to make sure that they're sound and they're kind of robust and they're not going anywhere. So I'd say you want to get them in about an inch. And some will need a little bit more kind of force than others. And on lots of these I've gone back and trimmed them to that point. It just makes inserting them so much easier. And I'm just having a little look over, just seeing where any of the kind of gaps are. You want it to be quite even, and it all helps make that circular shape. And don't worry if you've got any leftover branches, you can always go in and add them later on if you feel there are any gaps. I particularly find it helpful to add in bits right near the end. Once it's hanging on your door, you suddenly seem to notice little gaps that you might need filling. So it is always handy to have a few branches here and there. And next I'm going to be adding in this lovely pittosporum. I love this stuff. Again, it does provide two different colour tones. It's got that lovely soft sageness to it, and the leaves are just, they do a fantastic job at kind of covering your mechanics here. And I just think they go very nicely together with the olive. So again, just cutting these down to a shorter size that's more manageable for the wreath. But if you want to keep your stems longer, that is absolutely fine. I'm very, very much looking forward to making this again in a few weeks' time, where I will be live on Friday night, on the 18th of March actually. I'll be live doing this on my Instagram account as part of our Flowers for the Weekend, which I really love because I know lots of you are planning gatherings kind of around that date, and yeah, it's just a really nice activity to kind of start the weekend off. Again, zero waste. And exactly the same as what we've just done, we're just going to be inserting these stems in the same way, in the same direction. You're just kind of filling in. And you can, this one's just a bit too long, so I'm going to trim that down. And you always want to make sure that you've got a good inch and a bit that's free of any leaves, otherwise they're not going to be inserted as easily. If you've got leaves getting in the way, they just won't go in as easily. And just still paying attention to all sides of your wreath, all angles, all round here needs a bit more coverage for me. It's easy to forget when you're working over something. So if you're making this with somebody, I highly recommend you get them to lift it up for you. One, to check that everything's stuck down and that you don't need to go back and rewire anything. But it really gives you a good view of how everything's looking. If you're on your own, then you could stand in front of a mirror and hold it, or place it on the floor so that you're even further away from it, and stand back, which I'm sure many of you have probably actually seen me do when we did Christmas wreaths, because they are so big that it does become very difficult to kind of see what you're doing. Just hit a little tube there, so just making sure that it's definitely gone into the moss. It's probably a bit too chunky. So it's looking quite full down here. I've got a little bit of gaps going on here and maybe there, but we've still got quite a lot of foliage to use. But I'm just going to go back with what I have got and fill in. And I don't mind it being a little bit less full here, because I've got quite a lot going on with the mascara and I don't want them to be completely covered. So it's finding that balance where you're happy with, you know, some of the moss being exposed, which I do personally like, but balancing it out with the rest of your wreath. Okay. Just a few more of these before I move on to the other variety. Yeah, I'm going to leave them there in case I want to go back to any of them. Just clear away these little leaves. And then we're going to go on to this lovely variety of pittosporum, which has just got that lovely kind of cream ivory tone to its leaf, which just really picks up on the whiteness of the flowers, which is why I chose this one. And again, you're just going to cut these into smaller stems. And there's lots of side shoots on this variety, which is great, and lots of leaves, so you just want to be cutting in between all of those lovely leaves. And I really feel like this foliage adds the perfect kind of finishing colour, finishing touch, texture. You don't need a lot of it because it's very dense with its leaves. Okay, and in exactly the same way, we're just going to fill in around those gaps. I'm just going to remove some of those lower leaves so I've got a nice easy bit to work with. And I think you can just see already how kind of important this pittosporum variety is to the wreath. Like it just lifts everything. You can grow this in the UK. It's a great one to have in your garden. They get quite big. So hopefully at this point, you've got a really nice covering and you're just kind of, I guess I call it like tinkering at this point, just making sure like you're completely happy with the shape, the coverage. And what's lovely is that you can just pull them out if you're not happy with certain bits and bobs, and reposition them. They're not, wired in for this wreath, which is quite helpful. I'm just still paying attention to this kind of outside rim. But yeah, otherwise I think that is a nice base covering of our foliage. I often forget about the top actually, and I think it's easy to because it's like the furthest point away from you. So just have a little check of that and make sure you're happy. Any leftovers could always go in a nice little bud vase. Kind of spread the foliage around. Just going to pull that into the middle a bit here. Great. So I'm just kind of having a really good look standing over. Definitely happy with that. And now we're going to add in our lovely wax flower. And again, this just adds kind of a lightness and freshness to the wreath. You just want to cut down into some smaller stems again. I always feel like waxflower has a lovely lemony fragrance to it. It just feels like so zingy and fresh. And in exactly the same way, we're just going to be poking these in and just spread them nice and evenly throughout your wreath. They just add a lovely delicacy and just a different kind of texture. to your wreath. Just kind of nestling them in, but also nice to have a few that stand up a bit. Okay, that's them in. And then we're going to add in our pussy willow. So obviously these are very long, so we just want to cut these down into some more manageable sizes for us to work with. And it's up to you. You can keep these, you know, on the longer side if you prefer. It is totally up to you. But again, they just pick out that whiteness, keep everything really light and fresh. And our magnolia tree has actually got tons of this on it now, and it is taking everything within me to not snip it. It's not that old. I think it's about 2 years old now. Yeah, I'm not going to do it. It's precious. And then you're just going to trim them at a nice 45-degree angle so you've got a nice spike to work with, and poke these into the moss in exactly the same way, just poking them throughout, and in kind of try and keep them at different angles. So, you know, have and different kind of in different not different directions, because you want to go in the same direction as your foliage, but yeah, I think it's nice to have them poking in at different kind of angles. And like with this one, where I've cut it, you can see that that just looks a little bit blunt. So I'm just going to take that down right underneath the actual bud. Oh dear, I was trying to show you when I've popped it off. So yeah, right down to that next one, and then you would never know that they've kind of been cut down. They just look a lot more natural. Last one, I'm just going to pop in there. I don't think I need that one. And then we're finishing it off with our fabulous eggs. It just wouldn't be a spring wreath for me without these. And this year's come very handily wired and attached with your feathers already. And just got that lovely speckle to them. So you've got 4 of these, and obviously these are too long, so you just need to trim them down to size at a nice 45-degree angle again. So they poke in nice and easily. And just have a think about where you want them positioned. You don't need to use all 4 just because you've got them. Sometimes 3 might work better. But certainly I feel like I've got quite a lot of like kind of flowers and the bulbs going on here and here. So I definitely want some eggs over here and down in here. So I'm just going to poke this one in. I might need to trim that one a little bit so it kind of, I don't want it to stand out too much. I think it's nice when they look quite close to the wreath. And you can kind of manipulate the foliage so it kind of goes in and around the eggs so they look very naturally embedded. And have some on the kind of edge. And then maybe some down here. And these final ones just going to poke in down there. And because they're on wire, you can manipulate the eggs to do whatever you want, which is very handy. And then just cover any of the wire over with probably the pittosporum or the foliage. And that's it. We've added everything. And I will turn it around for you to see. And we'll talk a little bit about maintenance and kind of caring for it. So really, not too difficult. You can lift it off your door, and spritz. So you get a nice spritzer and spritz the back of your wreath base. Or if you haven't got a spritzer, sorry, I realise I'm holding that wonky. There is our top. You could literally just get a long spouted kind of watering can and give it a nice soak on the back. Bear in mind that would drip when you put it back on your door, so you can leave it on the floor somewhere to kind of drain off. And I would probably do that, honestly, only about once a week. The foliage isn't too thirsty. It's really just kind of the wax flower, and our flowers are obviously sitting lovely in vials. So with your vials, once your flowers have gone over, which will probably be in about 10 to 14 days, you'll be surprised if the weather stays nice and cool, they will last a little bit longer. And you can just lift your flowers out, find the little lid where we were at, refresh the water, just get a long spouted watering can and insert some fresh tulips, which you can always pick up in the supermarkets. And it kind of takes on then a whole different look with, you could get some lovely bright yellow tulips, yellow daffodils, and you could get more white ones. So yeah, it's totally up to you. So more than anything, I hope you've just thoroughly enjoyed creating this year's spring wreath with me. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please share your photos with me. It is my favourite thing when I get to see you creating these and kind of seeing where they end up on your doors. So thank you so much. Happy spring, happy Easter, it's not too far away. And I hope to see you again soon. Take care.